Okay, let's get started. So why are accessible documents so important? It's all of our responsibility to comply, firstly, to comply with the Disability Discrimination Act by producing documents that are accessible to all. Secondly, we must follow the Australian Government Style Manual, which states that accessibility is a mandatory standard for government content. Thirdly, we must reduce the department's legal and reputational risk that may result from staff or customers who can't access your information. And lastly, be inclusive. So in the last census, we had 11% of staff who have an ongoing disability and 10% who are neurodivergent. So we need to consider our audience in the language we use, the readability of our communications, and the accessibility of our content. On this slide, we also have an image of the W3C web accessibility icon, which is a blue circle with a white human figure in the centre with their arms outstretched. So, what document types should be accessible? According to the Style Manual, content that must be accessible includes digital services and products, briefs, policy documents, reports, forms, technical and specialist content, and government communications, things like emails and newsletters. I do recommend you follow the Style Manual guidance in all of your communications because it does also cover accessibility guidance. There is also a priority order for document formats when publishing to the web. So according to the Government Style Manual, HTML is king. Just remember that any other formats you provide in addition to HTML must also be accessible. DocX or the Word document format is a second choice or second best. Thirdly, PDF. So PDF is getting a little better. It's now an acceptable format, but just be mindful there are still limitations such as reflow and zoom issues. So you must always have a DocX or a HTML version published as well. PowerPoint, so this should only be used for presentations. If you're publishing or sharing a presentation, just create an accessible DocX version and also provide transcripts of your presentation. You can provide a PDF version if you like, but it must be accessible. And Excel, just a note about that, we should probably reserve these for data only. And a note about if you are providing a full HTML version, if you're not providing a full HTML version of your content, you need to provide more than one alternative accessible format for people. So the first step to checking your documents for accessibility is to test with the built-in automated tools. Let's take a look at those. So the first one is the accessibility checker in Microsoft Word. This is the same tool available in most Office products, including Outlook, PowerPoint, and Excel. To check for accessibility in Word, just select the Review tab in the ribbon and click on the Check Accessibility button, which is shown on this slide. And the accessibility panel will appear, showing the inspection results panel. So I'll just show you what that looks like with my example. I've got a document here and we just go to the review panel and you've got your accessibility button there. And as you can see, you've got the inspection results showing there. The accessibility panel shows you a list of different things. So there's errors. These must be fixed to meet accessibility guidelines. This includes things like alternative text. Warnings. There's also warnings. These need to be checked manually. Some of the examples listed under warnings include checking your reading order, hard to read text, and more recently, we've been getting AI-generated alternative text for images, so it'll suggest that you review those. There's also tips that sometimes pop up. These are additional suggestions that you might like to fix. Just be warned that this tool is not 100% effective. So even if you pass the inspection, you may still have accessibility issues in your document. Some of the issues generally missed by the tool includes heading styles, watermarks, header and footer information, and link descriptions. But I will go through these later on in the training. The accessibility panel can help you fix quite a few errors. Just in order to fix them, all you need to do is expand the issue or the error, select the drop-down icon next to the issue, and then select one of the recommended actions. Let's have a look at that. So we've got our inspection panel here, and we've got a missing object description. So if we expand that, we've got picture 4, doesn't have alternative text, and you just have to select the drop-down box here, and it gives you an option to either mark it as decorative or provide alternative text. I will go into alternative text a little bit in more detail later, but that's how you use the inspection panel. Nice shortcut. Okay, so if you're using Kofax Power PDF, so this tool also has an accessibility checker built in. To use the checker, first you need to add the checker to your panels bar. In order to do this, all you have to do is right-click on the panel. A pop-up will appear where you can select compliance, and then the compliance panel will automatically open. So just to show you that working in Kofax, we've got our tools panel here on the left-hand side. If you right-click, you have a compliance option here. If you select that, you can see your compliance panel has opened up. So to check for accessibility, once it opens, I keep doing that. You need to select the gear icon or the options button. Just make sure the accessibility option is selected from there, and then select the compliance icon, which is right next to that gear icon or the options icon, and then you can click OK to scan. So if we go back to our compliance panel, you've got your gear icon or your options. You can select that. Just make sure accessibility is selected from the options, and then you've got your accessibility check icon right next to it. If you select that and hit OK, you'll end up with a very similar list of compliance results, similar to the other tool. And just like the other checkers, you can just expand all of these options, and you can right-click on each individual issue, and it will give you a shortcut to resolve that issue. So you can see here we've got another alternative text issue, and it gives you a shortcut to enter some alternative text for that image. If you're using Adobe Acrobat Pro, it also has a similar accessibility checker. Again, you have to add the tool to the panel. So to do this, you go to the Tools panel, select More Tools, which is a spanner icon, then go to the Accessibility tool under Protect and Standardize, and then you can add the button from there. So if we just open that up, here we are with our Tools panel here. You've got an option, More Tools. If you select that and then scroll down, you have a section called Protect and Standardize, and there's the accessibility tool right there. So to check for accessibility, you'll select the new accessibility tool from your panel, select accessibility check, and then select Start Checking button. So if we go back, we can go back to our document, select the accessibility tool, and we've got the accessibility check option here, and then hit Start Checking, and it will open up again another accessibility checker panel with the results. And just like the other two, you can expand and it will give you an option to fix. It's just slightly different and it gives you an option to enter alternative text for that one. So once you know where it is and how to add it, it's pretty straightforward. Okay, so let's cover some general guidance for working with Word documents. Plain English. So we need to use plain English because it helps people with dyslexia, people with a CALD background, as well as people with cognitive disabilities. But it also improves readability, speed, and comprehension for everyone. To write in plain English, the general rules are use active, not passive language, use short sentences and shorter words. If you want help with this, we do have a visible thread tool you can use in the department, and I'll provide a link to this information at the end of the presentation. Secondly, talking about fonts. So we need to use sans serif fonts like Arial for digital content. These are fonts without the little feet and are much easier to read for a range of users, including users with dyslexia, low vision and cognitive disabilities. The other important thing to note is we need to avoid uppercase unless you're using it for an acronym. This is because some screen readers read out the uppercase words one letter at a time because it assumes that it's an acronym. Block quotes. So there is a block quote style in your general styles in Microsoft Word. I would use these for larger quotes only, and just make sure you're not using it to emphasize text. Also, I recommend you follow the style manual guidance on the use of block quotes. There's lots of information in there. Formatting, there are a few things you need to avoid, like excessive formatting, for example, bold. So make sure you reserve bold for things like definitions or identifying buttons and navigation names when you're creating step-by-step instructions. Underlines, it's really important to reserve underlining for links, otherwise it creates a bit of confusion. Italics, make sure you avoid italics for big blocks of text. It makes it very hard to read for some people, particularly people with dyslexia. Also avoid extra paragraph spacing. Screen readers will read out each blank paragraph, so to create some white space between text, make sure you use line spacing instead. You can check for empty lines by turning on the paragraph mark show hide icon in the home ribbon. So I'll show you what that looks like. It's just in the home ribbon, it's just your little paragraph mark here. And you can see here we've got extra paragraph marks here. The other thing we need to do is make sure we're avoiding justified text alignment. So that's the alignment that aligns it to the left and the right, and this causes white space, odd white spacing between words, which makes it really hard to read. So make sure you stick to left justified text. And lastly, avoid columns for documents that won't be converted to PDF because some screen readers do find these difficult to navigate. Quick word about background content. So we use watermarks typically when we want to mark a document as draft. These make it very difficult to read the text when a watermark's in place. So if you do want to mark a document in draft, just make sure you add it to the title. And lastly, we need to repeat header and footer information, particularly important information, into the body of the document. The reason is some screen readers ignore this information, and we need to make sure any important information such as the classification and the departmental logo are included in the readable text. You only need to copy it over once, and also you won't need to copy over page numbers or the title information that typically sits in the footer, as they'll already be accessible from other areas of the document. Okay, the next slides I want to concentrate on, well, they actually align with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or the WCAG standards. This is an international standard for making content more accessible for people with disabilities. Firstly, this guideline is about making sure your document has a descriptive and informative page title. This is pretty easy to do if we follow existing records management guidance in the department. To update your title, all you need to do is go to the document properties under File menu and then select Info. Text and structure. This is about structuring your documents and text, particularly, and this is important particularly for people with cognitive impairment, literacy issues, and screen reader users. So screen reader users use shortcuts to jump to headings, lists, or links. To structure your document well, use well-defined groups and chunk your information. You can do this by using headings and lists to break up content, and this also creates some white space. I'd recommend you use the built-in table of contents in Microsoft Word for longer documents particularly. And I would also recommend you use the link version so that this helps users navigate your document by skipping to the relevant sections using the links. Headings, there's quite a lot of important advice for headings. So we need to make sure we're always using the built-in heading styles. These are H1, H2, or heading 1, heading 2. As a general rule, if any text looks like a heading, make sure you use the correct format style. Also, I would recommend you only use heading 1 once in a document. Also, avoid using the title style. I know this appears in some of the templates as well. The reason for this is that it's not tagged by some screen readers. So instead, use the heading 1 style. I would also avoid duplicating heading text, as this can create some confusion. Just make sure each of your headings are unique. Also, make sure you structure your headings in a hierarchy and nest them correctly. As you can see on this slide, our heading hierarchy diagram shows H1 at the top with connecting lines to a row of H2s, and the center H2 box has 2 heading 3 boxes connected below it. Also, don't skip any heading levels. You can use your table of contents in that instance to double check if you've got any skipped heading issues, or if you've got any things like empty heading styles. And this is when you've got a blank line and it's styled as a heading. So you'll see that in your navigation pane. So I can show you that. Oh, I can't show you that. But you'll see a little blank section in your, oh no, I can show you that. Apologies. There we go. So you can see this document is purposefully inaccessible. But if we start adding our heading styles, you can see that they're going to start appearing in your navigation pane. But if I apply a heading style to something that isn't text or is an empty row, you can see there's an empty space in your navigation pane. So just look out for those. And finally, lists. Just make sure you're using built-in list styles for all your text. Anything that looks like a list needs to be styled like a list. This includes bullets and numbering styles. Reading and navigation order. So your document's reading and navigation order needs to be logical and intuitive. This is important for screen readers, as this is the order that your content will be read out in. In Microsoft Word, typically this is mostly automatic. It's top to bottom, left to right. But to make sure you preserve this order, all of your objects need to be in line with text. This includes images and icons, charts and maps. If an object is not in line with text, then it's floating on the page and will be read out in the wrong order or can be missed by screen readers entirely. So to check if an object is in line, first select the object, go to the picture format ribbon, then select wrap text and select inline with text icon. So if we have a look at this, we have an image here that's floating on the page. And if we go to our picture format ribbon, we go to wrap text, we can see there's a couple of options here, but we need inline with text, which is the top one. And you can see the text is actually moved out of the way from behind the image, which means a screen reader will be able to read all of that information in the correct order. There's a couple of things I would avoid to preserve your reading and navigation order. One is text boxes. These are really difficult to add to a meaningful sequence. Instead of a text box, I would recommend using an empty or a single table cell. If you're using multiple text boxes on a page, you might find it a bit better to use an invisible table. So if you're using tables in this way for styling, essentially, make sure you don't include a header row. The last one is smart art. So these are complex graphics and can cause accessibility issues. For example, screen readers will read out the text but will miss all of the connectors and the contextual flow information like arrows and groups. So it only gives the user half of the information. So instead, if you really want to use smart art, you can turn it into a picture once you've created it and then provide a text alternative below. Just make sure you describe all of the text and the flow of information. Link purpose. So the purpose of each link should be clear from the link text alone or from the link text and its context. So that means the surrounding text, list items, previous headings, or table headers. If you're linking to a file for download, make sure you include information on the file format and the file size. I would avoid repeating the same link text in the same document, because this is confusing to screen reader users, as well as linking to the same URL but using different text within the same document for the same reason. Here's a couple of examples. So a bad example would be download our word checklist with the word download being the link. This doesn't provide the user with enough information to know where the link's going. A good example would be download our iCentral Digital Accessibility word checklist with the link text on iCentral Digital Accessibility word checklist. Here we've provided enough information within the linked text so all users can understand what they're clicking on. You can see we've also included information on the docx file format and that the document is 67 kilobytes in size. Tables. These are tricky. So there are some rules for the use of tables. We should reserve them for data, except for certain situations. And make sure you include a table summary or a caption above the table. For example, you can see on my slide that above the table image, I have provided the summary, table 1 summary. And for longer documents, and if you have multiple tables, you must number the tables and also reference the table within the relevant text above it. Try not to use tables for layout, except for if you're creating forms or text boxes. But if you do need to use a table for styling, just remove the header row and keep it small. It's also important to keep tables as simple as possible. I know this isn't always possible, but just make sure you avoid any merged or split cells. And if you only have a column, make sure you try and only have either a column or a header row, because subheadings within a table or header rows particularly, this creates a lot of confusion. And it's much better to split up the table in this case into separate tables. And also make sure you don't have nested tables. So this is when you have a table within a table. And another point is make sure you set the table header. You can do this by selecting the row, the header row, and then select repeat header row from the table layout ribbon or in the table properties. I'll show you how you can do this in our example. So we have a table here with column headers. If you select that entire row, you can go to the layout ribbon up the top and just select repeat header rows. And this essentially tells a screen reader, hey, these are headers, and it will read them out as a header. Okay. So if you have column headers, so that's your headers on the left-hand side of the table, what you need to do is select the first column and then insert a bookmark, and then you type in row title with no spaces in the bookmark name field, and then you can add, then you can click add. So I'll show you how we do that. We have our row header table. So we select the first column and then we select insert. There we are, bookmark, and we're typing in row title with no spaces and just hit add. And this is a particularly specific one, I think, for JAWS, the JAWS screen reader, and it just identifies those columns as a header. And lastly, is it lastly? No, it's not lastly. The next thing to remember is make sure your table doesn't have any empty cells. So if you're using a numeric table, include either a dash or a zero. If you have a table with words in it, you can spell out the word 0 or nil for those data tables. If you're using colours to indicate your header rows or other information, just make sure that they meet colour contrast criteria, which we will cover later on. And finally, tables are very useful when providing a text alternative for charts or graphs. Okay, alternative text. So you must provide alternative text for non-text content. So this includes images, logos, icons, and meaningful means there's a visual meaning to the object. So this helps screen reader users understand the visual side of your content. Just try and keep it to 1 to 2 sentences, because it does make it difficult for screen readers to navigate through the alternative text if it's longer than that. For decorative images that have no meaning and are just there for decoration, you can mark them as decorative. However, even if the image is decorative, you must always include alternative text if the image is also a link. The alternative text in that case would be describing the link location rather than the decorative image. For complex images like charts, graphs, floor plans, process flows, I would add a reference to a more detailed text alternative and then provide a text alternative including all of the data and visual information immediately below the image, or you can provide a link to a separate page. For example, for charts or maps, you can provide the same data in a table. For floor plans, I'd recommend you add a grid to the plan if there isn't one already, and then you can plot the contents of each segment in a table with a grid reference. For a process flow diagram that has defined steps, you can use a list or headings and provide yes/no options underneath. Just make sure you include directions to the next step. For example, continue to step 6 to represent any arrows connecting each option. To add alternative text or mark an image as decorative, all you need to do is select the image or icon and then select alt text from the picture format ribbon. And then your alt text panel will appear. So if we have a look at our image in our example document, we can go to the picture format ribbon and we've got our alt text option here. You can also access it by right-clicking on the image and also in your accessibility panel. As you can see on this slide, we've provided alternative text for the image. The alternative text reads Alt Text Panel in Microsoft Word. An orange outline surrounds the alternative text entry field and the mark as decorative option box. In the context of the content on this slide, particularly the steps on above it or beside it, this is all we need to provide. So if we did provide all of the text on this image, it would be confusing and not actually the purpose or the intent of the image. The next one is about sensory characteristics. So this means that you shouldn't rely on shape, size, visual location, or color in your instructions. For example, click the square icon to continue. This obviously affects people who have a visual disability and they won't be able to complete the instructions. The use of colour. So colour should not be used as the sole method of communicating content or distinguishing between visual elements. So this covers content such as reference keys in tables, charts, things like that. There is one exception to this rule. If the colours do differ in both colour and lightness, then it's okay as long as the difference between the colours meets a contrast ratio of 3:1 or greater. For example, a light green and a dark red do differ both by colour and lightness, so that would pass. However, it is better to use colour and at least one other method, including you can use text, shapes, or patterns. As you can see in the example on my slide, the bar chart has 3 bars separated by white space, as well as each bar containing different patterns to distinguish each. Also, the colours of the bars have sufficient contrast with the white background, as well as the patterns. Okay, while automated tools, the automated tools I've shown you today can identify some colour contrast issues, you will still need to double check anything that's hard to read or distinguish. The rules around contrast include a contrast of 4.5:1 for general content and small text, and a contrast of 3:1 for large text. So this is text that's 18 points or 14 points and bold. It also applies to icons with the surrounding or adjacent colours, and chart and graph components like bars and pie slices. They need to have also need sufficient contrast with the surrounding background or the adjacent components if they're beside one another. We do have a tool in the department that can help you test colour contrast. It's called the Colour Contrast Analyzer or Checker, and it's available through ServiceNow. And if you need any help using the tool, just reach out and we can help. So images of text, as a general rule, if the same visual presentation can be made using text, you shouldn't use an image. Logos are one exception to this rule. The reason for this is that users with Zoom tools like ZoomText will have a loss of clarity on the images with the text, and these users often won't benefit from the alternative text. So you can see I've demonstrated that with a magnifying glass and some pixelated letters in the middle. Okay. The next one, creating forms. So I wanted to talk about creating forms using documents, but before I do, I just want to say the default format for forms should be HTML. This allows developers to include full accessibility features. However, I realise creating HTML forms is not always possible. So if we are making forms in our documents, we need to make sure they're fully accessible. So how do we do that? In Microsoft Word, there are 2 methods for creating forms. There's a simple method and a more complex method. The simple method involves using styling tables with no header rows. This means if a user enters their details, the formatting of the page stays largely intact, and it also means that we can make sure, just make sure you allow enough room for a typical entry. Using tables also means screen readers can announce the number of columns or rows ahead of time, which gives the user an idea of how many questions are coming up. You can also style the tables with borders to make it look like a paper form. You can see the examples on the screen. I've got two forms. The top one has 3 questions to the left, which contain name, address, and role. And to the right of these questions are 3 empty table cells with a black line at the bottom of each cell. The second form has 3 cells that are styled to look like checkboxes. Each checkbox has an X to represent a checked checkbox that the user can actually enter. And besides these checkboxes, there are 3 answers that they refer to, and that includes yes, no, and maybe. The last point I would like to make about the simple method is to make sure you don't lock down your form. So anything that's locked down in Microsoft Word will be missed by screen readers unless you use the complex method. So I'd recommend using the simple method in the first instance, and then we've got the other options if it gets more complicated. Okay, a little bit about the complex method. So we don't have enough time to go through this method in detail, but briefly, the complex method of creating Word forms includes using the legacy form controls. So the reason for this is the newer form controls in Microsoft 365 are not actually accessible. And you'll need to lock down different sections of the form with the form fields to allow users to enter the details in the fields. You'll also need to lock down only certain sections. So to do this, you'll need to use section breaks to separate the content or the text from the interactive form controls. Because remember, once a form's locked down, the content is not read out by a screen reader. Because it's locked down, you'll also need to add labels and instructions and other help text to each form control. And I would recommend you enter as much information in the add text help settings as possible. If you're confused, I'm not surprised. It's not easy to create a form this way. For complex forms, we recommend you use HTML or Excel, but we can help if you do want to try the complex Word method. Just reach out to accessibility@industry.gov.au for help. If you're more familiar with Excel, you may prefer to create forms here. However, keep in mind that Excel can be a little harder to navigate for users with Dragon, which is the speech-to-text product that we have here in the department, and some screen readers. But to create an Excel form, first you need to add a question in one cell and leave a space for the input field beside it. You can then, secondly, format the input cell to make it look like it needs to be filled in. You can add shading and formatting. You can add formatting things like dates, text, and dollar figures. And this is in the home ribbon under the format cell settings, or you can just right click on the cell and select format cell. You can also, within this format cell pop-up, you can update the visual look from the border or the fill tabs, and you can update the data formatting from the number tab. So if we have a look at an example, so we can go to the home ribbon and we can go to format cell. I've forgotten where it is. We can go to format cell, and you can see here you've got your font, you've got your border and your fill settings. So you can see the shading that I've created there, and you can also put in either number or date formats, things like that. Okay. The next point I want to make is about adding data validation. So this is useful for date fields if you want to create, or if you want to create drop-down fields. So any validation you add here, you must let the user know in the help text. So to do this, you just select data validation in the data ribbon, and then you set your date range or a drop-down list, or add rules for text length or decimal places. So if we go back here, we can go to the data ribbon, and we've got our data validation option here. And you can see here for the date of birth, I've added a date validation criteria, and I've also set a date range. So if you are adding data validation to your forms, you really need to include input information. So here I've provided a little bit of guidance on what format they need to enter, and as well as input information, you need to also provide a warning or an error alert message, just to let people know if they've entered in the information incorrectly, and also provide guidance on how to enter correct information. Okay. So we also need to add help text to include the questions, the instructions, and as well as the formatting and validation rules. The reason is because once you protect your Excel worksheet, similarly to when you protect a Word document, any surrounding information, input instructions or rules will be ignored by the screen reader, so you'll need to provide it in the help text for the user. Okay, so to do this, again, in the data ribbon, you can select data validation. For validated cells, you must also add the error message, like I mentioned before, to explain why the validation failed and how they can rectify their information. And once you've completed your form, you can protect your workbook and your worksheet. So this locks it down so that your user can actually enter information into your form, into your fields. First, you need to lock down your form by selecting the Protection tab in the Format Cells settings. Then select the input cells and unlock those cells in the Format Cells settings. So if we go and select our form area, we can go to Format Cells and we can go to Protection. And you can see we've already done it, but you would select Locked and Hidden to protect your cells. And then you would select the editable area of your form, and you would do the same thing. You would go to Format Cells, and then you would unlock and unhide those cells so that it's available for your user to enter. Next, you'll protect your worksheet and your workbook through the Review tab, and this allows users to interact with your form fields. So if we go to our Review ribbon, you can just protect your sheet here, and you can add a password if you wish. So that's the Excel method. Okay, so a little bit of information around other document formats. So I'll just go through some tips on these formats and their accessibility. Firstly, PDF. So it's best to create PDFs by converting them from Word. So when you're converting, before you even start, just make sure you check your document is fully accessible using the checker, and because it's much harder to make a PDF accessible if the original document had accessibility issues carried over. All you need to do is then convert by selecting File, choose Save as Adobe PDF or Save as Kofax PDF, depending on which product you're using. Then select the Options button. Then you need to make sure that both the Enable Accessibility and Reflow with Tagged PDF is selected and Convert Word Headings to Bookmarks is selected. So we go back to our Word document. We can select File, and you can see the two options here. So Save as Adobe in this instance. Here we go. So we need to save the document first, and your Options button is here in your little Save As dialog box, and your two options that we're looking at here. So we're enabling accessibility and reflow with tagged Adobe PDF, because all of the good work that you've done in your Word document, styling your headings and fixing up your alternative text, will carry over. And we also need to convert Word headings to bookmarks because that'll carry over into the Word document. And then you just hit OK and save, and then it will create your PDF. And it can't do it, but you get the gist of the steps. It's always the way. So once you've converted, you need to check your PDF for a couple of things. Firstly, you need to check the title. So you can do that through the file, then properties. You need to check the security. Just make sure you haven't added any restrictions and your PDF isn't protected or locked down. So this will actually stop screen readers accessing your PDF content. You'll also need to do an accessibility check using the checker because there might be additional issues after the conversion. And you also need to check your reading order and tagging. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time to cover all of this in today's presentation, but we do have PDF document guidance on iCentral under the Digital Accessibility Guide that you can go to. So if we go to our PDF or that PDF document, so you can go to File and you can see the title here. Just make sure it's descriptive. You can also go to Security and just check that all of these options are allowed. It's just allowing screen readers to be able to access all that information. And yeah, do your accessibility check and your reading order. So that one, I think I can do that in PDF. Okay, so Adobe Acrobat is actually a little bit easier to use. We have a reading order tool in the accessibility tool options. So that'll just show you what order the screen reader will read your document in. Okay. Outlook. So accessibility for Outlook emails is almost identical to Microsoft Word. So all of the guidance that I've provided in this course today will apply in Outlook, in your Outlook content. So I would advise you to be more careful when creating newsletters or staff communications because the risk of staff not being able to access your information is greater with the more users that it goes to. Also, avoid publishing an Outlook message file to the web. If you do need to publish it, create a HTML version before publishing. PowerPoint is a little bit tricky. It's more of a visual tool, and this can cause accessibility challenges. As I said earlier, you should use PowerPoint for presentations only. Avoid using this format for plans, strategies, and process flows unless you like a challenge. One tip I would recommend for making PowerPoints accessible, especially if you're converting to PDF, is just check the reading order of each slide really carefully. To do this, you can select Arrange from the Home ribbon and then the Selection pane. And this will show you the reading order, but it will be bottom to top. However, you can go to your accessibility checker and right-click on the option when it asks you to check the reading order, and it will show you the reading order in the correct order. So if you're checking your reading order, you just need to put it in the correct order. So visually, left to right, top to bottom. And to help with formatting of titles or other objects, make sure you're using the slide master outline for everything. If there isn't something on a slide outline already, I'd recommend you create one. It just makes it much easier if you're converting a PowerPoint to PDF, if it was already fully accessible before you convert it. And Excel, so you can't really have floating images like charts or images in Excel, and Excel won't give you the option to put it in line with text. So they'll always be floating and skipped by some screen readers. So avoid them as much as possible and use Excel for data If you are creating charts, however, make sure you create the chart in a separate worksheet and use the F11 shortcut to do this. You will still need to provide alternative text for any charts, and as I covered earlier, you can also use Excel to create forms. Okay, let's talk about some resources. There's a number of resources that you can access. The Government Style Manual, as I mentioned before, where there's guidance on writing content and everything incorporates accessibility. We also have our iCentral Digital Accessibility Guide. This covers guides for both Microsoft Word and PDF in detail, as well as general accessibility guidance. Visible Thread, I mentioned this for checking plain English. So this tool you can access by emailing a Word document or a PDF document to readabilityengine@industry.gov.au. This tool will then email you the readability results, and you can do this for anything up to, I think, protected information. W3C Images tutorial. So this resource can help you write effective alternative text. It has lots of examples and also has a link to the alt decision tree that can help you work out whether your image actually needs alternative text or not. We have the W3C Writing for Web Accessibility page, lots of guidance there for headings, structure and links. And then we've got the Section 508 document training. So this is free training. Section 508 is the American accessibility legislation, and it's the American agency that manages that. This training is very close to the standards we follow in Australia. It's actually more comprehensive and includes training videos covering Microsoft Word, PDFs, PowerPoint and Excel. And as I mentioned before, we do have an inbox, accessibility@industry.gov.au. You can contact us for any questions or assistance as you make your documents accessible. Okay, I'll open up the floor to questions and I'll stop sharing. Do we have any questions on the floor? Oh, we do have one. You're welcome.
That was awesome and very clear. Is there a centralized policy regarding accessibility in the department, like producing documents, like something that governs how we apply accessibility?
Essentially, it's the style manual, and we follow obviously the Australian standards. We don't have our own policy. I don't think we need an additional policy in the department when we've got, you know, sufficient policies outside. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Are you the go-to?
I am officially the Digital Accessibility Officer. I am here to answer any questions and provide guidance, and I can even, you know, look it up and ask the relevant authorities if it's that, you know, if it's a complex question.
Just with the title, you're the Digital Accessibility Officer.
Yes.
I work in the design team down on level 7, humble design team, and digitally, they're not always digital. So how do we sort of broach things like we've discussed today for printed documents?
Yep. So the style manual will cover printed documents. And like I said, the style manual was updated a while ago, just to include accessibility requirements, and they do keep it up to date. So if you're not sure, check the style manual.
Fantastic, thank you. Is there a centralized channel or somewhere where information will freely pour out for us workers?
Yeah, so I do run a digital accessibility guild in the department. It's for areas that work on digital products. We do have people from the comms division in comms areas, but anyone is welcome to join our guild. We talk about all things accessibility. I actually work on an accessibility roadmap in the department we're doing a lot of, work. So we provide updates on where we're at with lots of things, but we also do trainings, mini training session or presentations at this guild that are quite specific to different areas in the accessibility space. So if you're interested, reach out to that email address and we'll pop you on the list.
Fantastic, thank you. One other little question. Do you deal with other issues like inclusion as well, or just accessibility?
I do get asked a lot of inclusion questions, but there is a disability contact officer and there is an inclusion team as well that can provide advice as well. There is, I just noticed Emily's question about making events more accessible. There is some resources I can provide you, Emily. There is a government agency that provides really good guidance on how to make your presentations and events more accessible. So I'll put your name down, Emily, and send that through to you, and anyone else that wants that information, just reach out to the inbox. We've got another question.
Hi. You touched on it a little bit before with the department logo in the templates. The templates that are available for different documents, in general, are they accessible, or do we really need to go through?
So the document templates, the new templates that've just been released, the Word document template is fully accessible.
Excellent. Thanks.
So if you have any further questions, please reach out to the inbox. There's a team of us, two. But yeah, that's what we do. We answer questions and we're here to help. So definitely reach out. Alrighty, well, if there aren't any other questions, I'll wrap it up, and thank you all for coming. I really appreciate you coming along, and hopefully speak to you once you reach out, and good luck with your journey in making your documents accessible.